6 5-star reads, May has definitely made up for an underwhelming April. Come and see which 6 books were winners and all the rest of my May reads. Hello book friends, I'm Jen and welcome back to my reading life and welcome to another monthly wrap-up video. Today I'm going to wrap up all of the books that I read in May, and May was an amazing reading month. I had 6 5-star reads, 5 of which have become new all-time favorites, and 1 was a reread that was almost better the second time around. So grab yourself a cuppa. We're going to dive into all of the books I read in May. And while there were some that maybe weren't quite as good, it was a really great reading month. So let's dive in. As is my usual format for these videos, I am going to start with the books that I liked the least and work my way up to my favorites of the month. I always like to end on a high note. We're going to start off with a book that sounded really interesting in its premise and just wasn't executed in a way that I enjoyed, and that was The Kindness of Strangers by Emma Garman. This is a relatively new release, and I think I just got pulled in a little bit by all of the buzz that I was hearing about this book. It sounds really interesting. It is set in 1953. It sounded like it was going to harken back to Golden Age crime stories. Maybe it's trying to do that, but it is trying to do it with too modern of a sensibility about it. There were a lot of discussions of things in this book that made the characters feel like they were modern people, not people living in the 1950s, who would have had a different viewpoint on some of the subjects the author tries to tackle in this book. And then, truth be told, the mystery in this, it wasn't that strong in my opinion. And I kept reading because I thought, well, maybe there's some twist that I'm not seeing here. And while there was a small twist that I didn't catch on to until it was revealed, I pretty much figured out what was going on very early on in the book. And in this, we have a woman who owns a home in London and she rents out rooms. So she has a number of people who live with her, 2 young women, an older man who has the sort of basement apartment that's a little bit separate, and then another young man who lives and works with her. She runs a literary magazine. And then there is a new young man who comes into their midst, and there's something just not quite right there. And so that's the story we're following. Unfortunately, this was a miss for me, and I don't know that I would recommend it really to any of my viewers. I don't know that this would be your cup of tea. If anyone else has read this though, I'm really curious what your thoughts are, but it didn't work for me on a lot of levels. I think if it had been set in modern day, the mystery wouldn't have worked at all, but at least the modern sensibilities would have made sense. So a swing and a miss on this one. Next up was another mystery, and this is the start of a mystery series that I have read quite a few books in this series, but all out of order. So my goal is now to start it from the beginning and read through the entire series, and that is the Cat Who series by Lillian Jackson Braun. And the very first book in the series is The Cat Who Could Read Backwards. And in this, we are introduced to Jim Quillerin, who is our main character, and to his cat Coco, who isn't his cat when this book starts out, but they do end up coming together at the end. So it's sort of the backstory of how that happens. This is a perfectly good entry into the series. And again, it really is sort of setting up what is going to come later on in the series. And so you kind of do have to go along with that. I thought there were some really eccentric characters in this. The mystery was good. I'm excited to continue on because I really do think this is a series that gets better and better as it goes. So yes, definitely enjoyed my reread of this. And one quick note on this series, a number of you have recommended the audiobooks, and I cannot find audiobooks of the early books in the series. So if anyone knows where you can find those, or if they just don't exist, it looks like maybe the first one that's available is book, I think maybe 8 or 9 in the series. So if anyone knows if there are audiobooks of the earlier ones, I would love to listen to some of them because I do love mysteries on audio. So if anyone has any insights, please let me know. That would be fantastic. Now, I did not realize that this video was going to be front-loaded with mysteries, but I have one more for you that I read in May, and this is by an author who I really enjoy, and that is Last One Out by Jane Harper. This is Jane Harper's newest mystery that has come out. This is a standalone, and it is, of course, set in Australia, as all of her mysteries are. And we are following a woman, and she and her estranged husband and their daughter have returned to this small town where they all lived, the kids grew up, and where their son, who was, I think, was he turning 18 or 20? I think he was turning 20 on his 20th birthday. He went missing. He had driven his car out to kind of some abandoned homes and was never seen again. And so you kind of are following along with the mother and what she's going through. It's the anniversary of his death. I feel like it's been 5 years, I want to say, since he's been gone. You know, the whole family is kind of dealing with that. And in the meantime, she just kind of can't let go of, you know, what had happened to her son because he was never found. And so it haunts her. And so that's what this book is about. It's not my favorite of Jane Harper's books, but it was definitely a solid mystery. And I listened to the audiobook and it kept me listening, definitely. It isn't my least favorite, but I do struggle a bit with mothers who are missing their children or their children have passed. So it's always a storyline that's just a little bit challenging for me to read, but I thought this was pretty well done, and the mystery itself was satisfying in its resolution. And I thought the reveal of that played out in a really interesting way. So if you're a Jane Harper fan, definitely don't miss this one. If you have never read her before, though, I definitely recommend starting with The Dry. That is a fantastic mystery. It was her first one, and it'd be a perfect summer mystery also. So I definitely recommend that one. We are going to move away from mysteries for the moment and to a book that is quite different from these first 3 I talked about. And that was our pick for the Cozy Reader Book Club in May, which was The Harvester by Jean Stratton Porter. And this was my very first book by Jean Stratton Porter. I'll definitely be reading more by her. I very much enjoyed this, though I will have to say that it did take me a bit to settle into the story. There's a little bit of animal abuse at the beginning that I wasn't prepared for and caught me off guard and sort of tainted my feelings about our main character, the harvester, for quite a bit of the book. So that was a bit of a challenge, but Jean Stratton Porter's writing and her nature writing are unparalleled. She does such a fantastic job with that element of the book. And this story does have almost a fairy tale quality to it. It's got that sort of young love, young romance feel to it, where the harvester meets this girl, Ruth. Well, I should go back. First, he has a dream about a girl, and he just becomes obsessed with finding this sort of perfect woman for him. And then he actually comes across her in real life, and you follow along with what happens to them. And I liked Ruth as a character, and she helped me feel more connected to the harvester. But there are some interesting choices that Jean Stratton Porter made in this. The harvester and Ruth are referred to as the harvester and the girl, which I found disconnected me a little bit from the story. Gosh, I feel like I'm being a little bit extra critical of this, but I really did enjoy this overall, and I thought the story wrapped up in a very lovely bow, which was wonderful. And like I said, I do want to read more by Jean Stratton Porter after having read this. I have The Girl of the Limberlost on my shelf, but if there are other books of hers that you've read and recommend, please let me know what they are, because I definitely want to read more. And if you have read other Jean Stratton Porter, then I definitely think you should give The Harvester a read, because it really is lovely. There's a lot of wonderful writing in here. Now we're going back to another mystery, but for this book, I'm actually not going to talk about it very much other than to just tell you what it is because I've already done an exclusive review video of this book. So I'm going to link that here in the cards and in the description box so you can go and hear all of my thoughts on this. But that is Midsummer Mysteries by Agatha Christie. This was a book that you all picked for me to read and review for you, which I did. And you all seem to really enjoy doing that. So we will be doing that again later this summer. I'm going to have you pick a book for me and I will read and review it for you. So stay tuned, more will be to come. But if you want to see all my thoughts on Midsummer Mysteries, then head on over to the link and watch my full review of this book. But spoiler alert, I loved it. Let's have a tea break, shall we? Nothing like a good cuppa. And then next up was a book that was a reread for me, but I picked this up because my lovely friend Rebecca from Rebecca's Literary Wanderings hosted the May Flowers Readathon in May again. I believe this is the third year she's hosted it, but it's the first time that she's done a group read. And this book was selected as the group read, and it's one I've been wanting to reread for a really long time. And that was The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton. And I have not read this since this book was first published here in the US, which I believe was in 2009, 8 or 9. And so it's been almost 20 years since I read this book. Now, I gave this 5 stars when I first read it, and I decided to listen to the audiobook on my reread because I heard that the audiobook narration was really wonderful, and it most definitely was. But as much as I love Kate Morton and I still really love this book, I did move this from a 5-star read to a 4-star read just because I feel like I read it with a bit more of a critical eye this time. I think that's because the first time I read this, I really just devoured it and just got swept along in the story, which you most definitely will be swept along when you read this. It's a very propulsive read, but there's a lot going on in it. There are quite a few storylines. So we are following first a young girl who is sent off alone on a ship from England to Australia. She's about 4 years old. She arrives there with no information. She won't even tell her name, and she is taken in by this husband and wife who are having difficulty having children, and they name her Nell, and she grows up with them thinking that she's their daughter. And then she finds out on like her 21st birthday that she isn't, that she's sort of adopted or just taken in, and this sort of alters the course of her life, and she kind of becomes estranged from the family that raised her, and she is trying to find out what happened to her. You're also meeting Cassandra, who is Nell's granddaughter, who comes to live with her because Cassandra's mom is a bit flaky, I guess is the best way to describe her. So we follow along with Cassandra's storyline as well. And then we also go back and we are following this young girl, Eliza, back in, I want to say the late 1800s. And she starts out in London living with her brother. Her mother has just died and they live in very squalid, kind of surroundings in this home run by this horrible woman. And you follow along with Eliza's story and you start to see how all of these things are interconnected. It's a lot to follow. And then amidst that, there is this woman called the authoress. You learn who she is as the story goes on, but she is a writer of fairy tales. And so there are some fairy tales intermixed in the story as well that kind of help move the plot along and give you information about things. And I really did enjoy that element. And I'm not much of a fairy tale reader. That's not a sort of subgenre I'm like drawn to, but I really felt like it worked in this book. I do think because there are multiple timelines happening in this story that it does make it a little bit diluted, and so it's a little bit harder to really embrace and fall in love with each of the characters in those storylines because there's so much happening. So I think it might have been a little bit stronger of a book for me on this read if maybe there'd only been 2 timelines. Again, it's a small quibble in what I otherwise think is a really wonderful read. There are lots of trigger warnings in this, so if you're concerned about content, I would definitely look that up before you dive into this. Kate Morton does often deal with very challenging subject matter, so I always recommend looking for things that might bother you if you're going to dive into one of her books, but they're so immersive. I really do think she does do dual timeline and multiple timeline stories better than almost anybody else out there. And yes, she's just a wonderful storyteller. So again, this is a wonderful read. I was so glad that Rebecca's read along prompted me to pick this up again, and her discussions of it on her channel were wonderful. So if you haven't seen those, but you've read The Forgotten Garden, you should go check them out because we had some wonderful chats there. But yes, I definitely recommend this if you're a Kate Morton fan, but I maybe wouldn't start with this one if you've never read her before. So, but still a fun reread. Next up is a very different book from The Forgotten Garden, and is the last book I'm going to talk about that was not a 5-star read, though it was very, very close for me. And that book is Old Herbaceous by Reginald Arkell. And this is a novel of the garden. So it is what it says it is. I love this cover. So beautiful. Perfect springtime read. If you enjoy gardens and gardening, even if you don't and you just enjoy reading about those things, you will love this book. It's a little bit funny. We're following Old Herbaceous. He's sort of looking back on his life. So then it starts when he's older and we go back to when he's a boy and kind of watch him grow up as he takes a job working on kind of this big English estate as a first sort of like an under gardener, and then he kind of works his way up to being head gardener. The back of my book makes allusions to this being similar to P.G. Wodehouse's Jeeves, and I definitely think that's not a wrong comparison. And Old Herbaceous is such a character. He has such an interesting kind of viewpoint of the world, and the gardens just mean so much to him, and it's so much just this world that he totally inhabits, and it was really just lovely to follow along. This is such a slim little almost novella, and if you haven't read it before and you need something to read for next spring, definitely add this one to your TBR because it was just lovely. And now we have made it to the 6 books that were 5-star reads for me in May. And these are really in no particular order, although the last 2 books that I'm going to talk about in this video, they really were just complete standouts for me. And they were so surprising and so wonderful that they're kind of in a class of their own. But I loved every single one of these books. And first up, of course, has to be Coming Home by Rosamund Pilcher. Rereading this along with all of you and discussing it, and it was such a joy to revisit Judith Dunbar and her family and her friends and her story, watch her come of age again through the difficult challenges of World War II. I just can't sing enough praises about this book. It is so wonderful. Someone asked me what my favorite Rosamund Pilcher book was during our final live stream discussion, and I really do go back and forth between this one and The Shell Seekers, depending on which I have read most recently. So right now I'm going to say Coming Home is my favorite. But when I reread The Shell Seekers, that one will probably come to the top 2. So they're so close. They're just neck and neck for my favorites. Winter Solstice is a close second, but these 2 just hold a special place in my heart. And I don't know, I just related so much to Judith, and she just made me care for her and worry about her and want the best for her. And there's so many wonderful minor characters, major characters, and just the world Rosamund Pilcher creates is like no other. Okay. Enough gushing about this. If you want to hear more about Coming Home, you can watch the 2 live discussions that I held with my friend Rebecca again. And I will have them linked down in the description box below. So if you want to go and check out all of the lively and fun discussion we had about the book, you can check them out there. But thank you all so much for joining me for this read along. I don't yet have another read along planned, but I have an idea for one, so stay tuned because hopefully there will be information coming about that later this summer. My next 5-star read is actually one I mostly read in April, but I didn't finish it until the first few days of May, so I'm including it in this month's wrap up, and that was The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. Now, I can unequivocally say that this is the best Jane Austen adaptation that I have ever read. I think Janice Hadlow did such an amazing job with this book. I think probably most of you are familiar at least with the story, but in this we're following Mary Bennet from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And I think it was perfect of Janice Hadlow to pick Mary because she is really the least developed of the Bennet sisters in Pride and Prejudice. She's the sister we see the least. So we don't know that much about her, and that allowed Janice Hadlow to flesh out her character and allow her to grow and blossom over the course of the novel and still keep it in the same vein and tone as the Mary we knew from Pride and Prejudice. So she kind of takes her on this journey as she evolves from the Mary that Jane Austen created into maybe something a little bit more interesting and well-rounded. And I know I've heard from a couple of people who have said that they didn't like a few of the choices that Janice Hadlow made about the characters in Pride and Prejudice, some of the other characters, and I might agree with that a little bit. There's a bit of harshness towards a couple of the characters that seemed maybe unnecessary, especially now that I've started watching the adaptation, which has softened those characters in the adaptation. And I think Janice Hadlow could maybe have done the same thing and still made us root for Mary and her story. But it is a small quibble in an otherwise fantastic book. And it starts sort of during the events of Pride and Prejudice. So right before Jane meets Mr. Bingley and Elizabeth meets Mr. Darcy, and sort of we're following along, but more from Mary's perspective of things. So it's kind of interesting. You're getting just sort of behind the scenes look at that. And that's sort of the first half of the book. And then the second half follows Mary after the course of Pride and Prejudice and sees what happens to her from there on. And I just loved it. I really was rooting for Mary, and I really came to love her throughout the course of this book. And I just think if you're a fan of Pride and Prejudice, give this one a read. It is really wonderfully done, and I'm so enjoying watching the adaptation, and I anticipate a new episode coming out every week. In fact, the day I'm filming this, there is a new episode dropping today, and I am definitely going to be watching it. If you are too, let me know if you're loving it. It is quite different from the book, but I think it is just a lovely adaptation, or just a lovely TV series in and of its own right. So read the book, watch the series. They're both fabulous. And my next 5-star read is one that I finished on the very last day of May, and that was Mariana by Monica Dickens. And this is a Persephone book, so I'm excited to have another Persephone book checked off of my to-read list and now on my read shelf. And Mariana is really a coming-of-age story. So we meet our protagonist, Mary, and she is staying in a cottage by herself with her dog, and she is listening to the radio, and she hears some news that the ship that her husband is on has been torpedoed. So this is during World War II, and she is waiting to find out because her telephone line is down and there's a huge storm raging outside. She has to wait till the next morning to find out if he's alive or dead. And so in the meantime, she's sort of reminiscing about the course of her life. So we go back to when she is a young girl and kind of follow Mary's story as she kind of grows up. She lives with her mother and her uncle, her mother's brother, in London, and just kind of their story and getting to see her. And I liked Mary because I thought she had just some really relatable foibles. Like, she wasn't just this perfect, rosy-cheeked, lovely child. She really kind of has some hang-ups about things, and she doesn't always say the right thing or do the right thing. She's fairly introverted, and you see her at school, you see her at her her father, who has passed away, her father's family home called Charbury. They go there every summer, and she has a bit of a crush on her cousin Dennis and really kind of idolizes him, and you see that relationship develop. And then we just follow Mary throughout the course of her life up until this moment where the book starts. And I was just with Mary the whole way and loved her story. In the introduction to this Persephone edition, the author of the introduction refers to this book as part of the hot water bottle genre of fiction, and I completely agree with that. If you are just in need of a story to settle in with, if maybe you're not feeling the best or you just need some comfort in your life, I just think this is a lovely, lovely book to pick up. I just was really charmed by this book, and I'm looking forward to reading more by Monica Dickens. I think I'm going to pick up One Pair of Hands next, but if you've never read Mariana, I definitely recommend it. Next up is a book that I've had on my wish list for quite a while. I believe I heard about this book on the BBC podcast, A Good Read. If you've never listened to that podcast, it is fabulous. And they read and reviewed this book in one of the episodes, and because it's about cats, I absolutely had to read it, and my son gave this to me for Mother's Day, so I read it right after Mother's Day and just devoured it, and that is Minka and Curdy by Antonia White. And this is the enchanting story of a writer and her cats. And that's basically what this is. We are following our main character, and her elderly cat has passed away, and she spends the first part of the book trying to decide if she should get another cat or not. And she really wants a Siamese cat, but one, they are expensive and she doesn't have a lot of money, and they're often hard to get. So when she's finally ready to bring another cat into her life, she is offered a marmalade cat. I love that the Brits call orange tabbies marmalade cats. I want to call them that from now on too. And then she is almost immediately thereafter also offered a Siamese, and she's not sure what to do, but in the end, she ends up taking them both. And so you just kind of follow along with Minka and Curdy and Mrs. Bell, our main character, as they all kind of get to know each other and get acclimated. If you are a cat owner or a cat lover, you will love this book. So Antonia White is probably best known for writing Frost in May, which I believe is a story of a young girl at a convent school. And I had wanted to read that one, but now that I've read Minka and Curdy, I really want to read it because I loved her writing in this so, so much. It's, again, a very slim little novella, and I think it is a book every cat lover should read. And now we're down to the final two books that really just made my May such a spectacular reading month. I adored both of these. They're very different. One is a modern novel. One is a furrowed middlebrow book, and so they couldn't be farther apart from each other, but they're both just so, so lovely. And the first book is Glaciers by Alexis M. Smith. And I'm just going to read you a little quote from the book that says, "Her story could be told in other people's things, the postcards and the photographs, a garnet ring and a needlepoint of the homestead, the aprons hanging from her kitchen door, her soft, faded, dog-eared copy of Little House in the Big Woods, a closet full of dresses sewn before she was born. All of these things tell a story, but is it hers?" So in this, we're following Isabel. She lives in Portland, Oregon, and she works at a library. She restores books that have been damaged, library books that have been damaged. And there is a man who comes to work at the library who had been a former soldier, and at first, sort of the library staff is a little bit unsure about having him there, but Isabel sort of strikes up a friendship with him. And in this, you're following Isabel over the course of a single day and just what happens to her and kind of, how her life sort of changes just in these small moments of this day. And I just thought this was so beautifully written. It reminded me a bit of Claire Keegan's writing, just the style of it and the sparseness and how really wonderfully Alexis M. Smith says a lot with not a lot of words. And this was just, it was just charming and wonderful and everything I want a modern novel to be, and oftentimes isn't. I couldn't put this down. I read it in a single day and then I immediately turned it over and started it again. That was how much I loved it. So if that appeals to you, I cannot recommend this little novella enough. It is charming and wonderful and just such a heartwarming, life-affirming little story. So I think if that sounds good to you, you should pick it up and give it a read. And then my final book, which I already talked about a little bit in my D.E. Stevenson author spotlight video. So if you want to hear a little bit more about this book, you can head on over there. I will link that video as well for you. But I was so surprised. This has become a new favorite D.E. Stevenson book of mine, and that was 5 Windows. And this is the story of David. And we are following David throughout his life through the 5 windows in his life that he sort of looks out of from the rooms that he lives in. So we start with him as a boy, and then he grows up to be a young man, and we follow him through the different windows, and they sort of are all a reflection of his life at that time. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about D.E. Stevenson having a male narrator, because every other book I've read by her has a female main character and narrator. And I was just completely charmed by David. He is such a wonderful character. And this is just full of D.E. Stevenson's wonderful descriptions of her just lovely writing style. There are characters to root for and characters that you hate and you just want to go away and get out of David's life. And I just loved seeing David grow and grow up and mature. And one of his windows is also from a room he takes over a bookstore. I mean, really, what more could you possibly need? I want to live in a room over a bookstore. That just sounds amazing. And David's life is pretty amazing at that point. So if that sounds good to you, if you are a D.E. Stevenson fan, do not skip this one. It is so fantastic. It is currently my #1 favorite D.E. Stevenson at the moment, subject to change at any time, but it's definitely in my top 5, and it will probably remain there because I just love this, and I will definitely be rereading it, but D.E. Stevenson, you've done it again. I'm going to try to hold all these up. Oh gosh, I have a lot of books here. A lot of big, The Forgotten Garden's upside down. Sorry about that. These are all the books that I read in May. I'll accept my one audiobook that I don't have a copy of. Don't drop them, Jen. That will wrap up my May reading officially. I can call it done now that I have shared all the books I read in May with you. I would love to chat with you in the comments below. What did you read in May? Did you have any standouts? Was your May reading good? Did you have like some really great books that you read? I just feel like May was such a good reading month, even with a few books that were, just okay, and one that was Overall, it was a spectacular reading month. So I am so looking forward to my June reading, especially because I'm just leaning into mood reading in June, and that has already begun. But May just seems like it got me on the right path to continuing on and having a wonderful reading summer. But let us chat all things May reading first. Any of these books, do you want to read them now? Or have you read any of these and also loved them? Let us talk all things May reading in the comments below. And if you're here but you don't have anything you'd like to add in the comments, but you'd like to let me know you were here, because comments really do help my channel. Well, since it's the tail end of spring, and since we read lots of books about sort of gardening and the natural world and different things, let's leave some flowers, some plants, some trees, any kind of natural foliage, whatever you would like. Let us bring the comments into blossom. Thank you all so much for being here. And if you enjoyed this video, if you could hit that like button and also the hype button if you're on the YouTube mobile app. And if you're new here, I'd love it if you haven't already, if you would subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss a thing. Again, thank you so much for being here, for spending time with me in my cozy corner of booktube. And thank you all for all of the lovely comments you have left on my recent videos. But as always, I will be back with another new video very soon. And until then, I wish you a good book and a warm cuppa. Bye.